Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Soebbing. It's a Stashing with Stephanie day, which means we are making a brand new fat quarter friendly pattern from this month's fat quarter collection that we have sent out to our subscribers. If you're not a subscriber, don't worry, you can get a full kit of this while supplies last. We are going to spend a little bit of time taking a peek at the fabric because that's super fun. And I'm also going to tell you a little bit about the club, then we'll get into the tutorial. So the club is a exclusive member discount. So when you come in, you get 10 fat quarters for $29.99 a month plus shipping. And right now, fat quarters are retailing anywhere from like $3.60 to $4 a fat quarter. So you're getting a deal because you're getting them for about $2.99 a fat quarter. So that's a good deal to start off with. Then if you like the bundle and you want to do something else with it, we send you a free pattern that's inspired by it, and you can use that to do it, or you can do your own thing with it. But whether you get our finishing kit, which includes whatever you didn't receive, like this month we have 15 fabrics in the collection, and our subscribers receive 10. So a finishing kit would include the 5 they didn't get, plus background and binding, and that will allow them to turn their bundle into a full quilt kit. You also can just get whatever fabric you want because we always have yardage available as well, and our subscribers get first dibs on that, and they get 25% off that plus their free pattern. So it's a really great way if you're quilting on a budget to be able to afford quilt shop quality cotton, brand new quilt shop quality cotton. We're not talking about bargain basement stuff. And you can just really have some fun with it. You can use our pattern or you can do your own thing with it. A lot of folks we've been seeing have been taking bundles and turning it into one of our previous patterns, because you also get access to our previous patterns that we've released. It's part of the club when you join, and we have changed it up. So if you've been a member before and you had issues loading your coupon in, you don't have to use a coupon anymore. The discounts are applied automatically as long as you're logged in. So it's super fun, super great way to get really good quilt shop quality cotton on a budget, because if you guys are gonna commit to get some fabric from us every month, then we're gonna commit to giving you a good deal on that fabric. And that's what Stashing with Stephanie is about. We can fill your stash with some goodies, some beautiful fabrics, give you some ideas on what to do with it. And if you wanna do something else, that's okay too. You can save on whatever additional fabric you want to do whatever you want with it. That's part of the collection. All right, so let's take a look at this month's collection. It is Modern Meadow from Cotton and Steel by Juliana Tayton. It looks like a bunch of block print florals. It's really pretty. And there's 3 different colorways. There is a purple, which we're gonna look at first, but the colors kind of work throughout it. So it definitely works to have little bits all over the place. So here we have some nice little leaves coming up, and we've got some floral bursts and seeds and some block print flowers that are super pretty. And then we're going to start seeing all the prints again, just in a different colorway. This one is the green colorway. It's also got a little bit of teal in it, and it's just really fun prints, and they work great together, all of the different colorways. And you'll see when we do our quilt that it really is just a fun one. All right, so now we are to the blues. They're really pretty. Also have some peachy in there, which is really beautiful. And I really love these rich ones. I think these are just super fun and really help stand out. All right, so this is just a really fun one. I feel like you could have it out more than just in the summertime because the colors really do work. Those darker bits really help ground it, and you could have the quilt out many months of the year, not just in the summer. But super cute, super fun. I'm gonna just kind of talk a little bit. I ran the camera while I was cutting, so you guys can get some tips on how to cut this quickly. I cut every single rectangle for our log cabin. It was over 500 pieces for the twin size that you can do if you have the entire collection. And I did it in about an hour, so I was ready to sew within an hour, so that is really great. So what we're doing here is we are going to use the Marty Michelle method of cutting log cabin strips. So We have our selvage here, and then we have our edge that's been cut across the fold. This is called the width of fabric. So typically when you're cutting, you're gonna cut across the width of fabric, and you can see that it's a little bit stretchy. Not as stretchy as the bias, but definitely stretchier. Now, if we look at the length of fabric and we tug on that, that doesn't have near as much give. So the Marty Michelle method of cutting log cabin strips, which we are using in the instructions tell you to cut your fabrics along the length of the fabric. And what that does, by cutting the long part along the part of the fabric that does not stretch as much, then your log cabin strips are much less likely to get out of shape when you're sewing them. I know we've all been there if we made a log cabin where they just keep getting smaller and smaller, or like off and off and off. Like your block is smaller than it should be with each one that you put on, and then your strip keeps getting longer and longer. And I did not have that problem on any block that I sewed, and I did not use pins for any of them when I was doing this quilt, and it's because we're going to cut along the edge that is not as stretchy, and so that everything will retain its shape much better. So we're going to do those tips and tricks, but what I do is I use the mat to measure. So I put everything out on there, and I use my mat to measure out my 1.5 inch and the other size that I need to cut for the log cabins strips that we're using. There's 2 different size widths for this one, and then I cut also the strips apart using the mat to measure. So basically you line everything up the 0-inch mark and on a 1-inch mark of your mat, and that way you're able to really evenly space those out, and then you can put your ruler over and cut them all at once. So it saves a ton of time when cutting. You do have to be really careful that you are definitely measuring twice and cutting once, because if you do cut wrong, you haven't just cut one wrong, you've cut a whole lot of them wrong. So that is very, very important. The other thing that I didn't film when I was doing it is when I was cutting my strips for my background, I cut my width of fabric first, and then when I was laying it down, I had all my strips. Some of them were going past the measurement that they were supposed to do, so I would cut them at the measurement that I needed to cut to get them to be the correct length for the next strip. And then I also trimmed at the width the strips were supposed to be, and that helped everything be correct from the start, and I didn't have to worry about anything shifting out of place. So I hope that makes sense, especially when you guys see the video, but it really will help you speed up getting ready to quilt. All right, so I'm going to clear this away, and then we're going to start sewing. So when I was putting the quilt together, what I did is I arranged all my pieces stacked up like this. And it's best to just work in a spot where you can leave it out until you're done, where it won't be disturbed. I know sometimes that's hard if we've got kids or pets, but if you've got a separate room where you can close the door, that is going to be your ideal situation, because you can leave everything stacked up. You can just keep coming back to it over a couple of days and get everything stitched together. That's what I did here. I just set everything up in my studio and worked until I was done. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by stitching our centerpiece to our outside, and then we're just going to keep working our way around, going around all the edges until we complete everything. The process is going to be the exact same as we go, so I'm just going to show you the first round plus this one here, and then we'll speed up the camera for everything else, because once you can get around one time, you're good. You're going to be fine after that. One thing I want to point out, and again, all your measurements are going to be in the pattern to go with this. It's called Undulation, and you can get that over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. It's free for members. We have different size log cabins. So we've got larger strips on the outside from the fat quarters, and then we've got skinnier strips from the background. So when we get this all together, it's going to have a very distinctive looking block. There's going to be less real estate taken up by your background fabric, and it really, when you put it together, looks more like circles going around than rectangles and squares, which is a really cool visual illusion that you can create, and why this type of log cabin has been on my bucket list legit for at least a decade. So I'm excited that we get to do it now, and this is a really fun fabric collection to do it with. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to flip these guys right sides together. Now these should be the exact same width because you should have cut them to the same width. In this case these are. If they are not, you need to check out right now what's going on, because if you start off wrong, it's just going to get compounded as you go on and on, because the nature of the way this block is if you make mistakes early on, it's not going to get better as you add more strips. So you need to stop and assess as you're going on. If things aren't fitting together right, you need to take some measurements, figure out if your strips are the size they're supposed to be. Did you cut your strips on the length of the fabric instead of the width like we recommended? What happened? Where are you going wrong? Are your quarter inch seams correct? Because those are all things that can make these get super wonky as you're going. I know I trimmed up some ones that one of our team members did once, and it just the quarter inch seam just wasn't consistent throughout it. And so it would start off, right, and then it would get a little off at the end. And then your strip would be a little bit shorter than it's supposed to when you get it pressed open. And then when you go to add your next strip on, then it doesn't fit right and it's too long. So if you're starting to see issues, diagnose it early. Check your quarter inch seam if that's correct. Check to make sure your pieces are the correct size that they're supposed to be according to the pattern. Check to make sure that you have cut across that length of the fabric. Check to make sure you're pressing your seams open. If all those things are happening and you still are having some problems, then maybe test it out. Make sure you're using quilt shop quality fabric, because sometimes things tend to stretch a little more when it's not quilt shop quality fabric. But as long as all those things are going right, you should have a correct sized, non-wonky log cabin when everything is said and done. Okay, so with all of that disclaimer, they're honestly not bad as long as you take the proper steps to start with. So we're gonna start sewing now. All right, so I've got my sewing machine set up to just sew a regular quarter inch seam, and I'm not pinning this. It's really small and they're exactly the same size. Again, if they're not, something is wrong from the start. You need to figure out what it is. Where did you cut wrong? So what we're gonna do is we're just going to stitch. I've got this fabric exactly even with the edge of that presser foot, and that will allow me to sew a quarter inch seam. And I've got a nice straight quarter inch seam going all the way down. That's also really critical. You've got to have it right all the way down. All right, so we've got it, and we have a nice straight quarter inch seam going all the way down. It's nice and even with the edge. If it's wobbly at any point, you have started off wrong. So make sure that you have that nice consistent quarter inch seam all the way down. And now we're gonna press this open. So to press open, what we're going to do is we're gonna open up that seam. And I'm gonna take the tip of my iron, I'm gonna put it straight down the center and push it down. And what you're looking for is a nice straight flat seam like this. If you see like a wiggle anywhere in there, means that you have a pleat on the other side. It's not gonna turn out the right size. All right, so now I'm gonna press it from the other side too, just to get it really good and flat. Now it's super important that it is good and flat. If it isn't, then it's not going to be the correct size that it's supposed to be. It's got to be like this is very, very flat. There are no wobbles. I took my time on it. This is a felt pressing mat. I really like them. We don't sell them because they are too prohibitive from a shipping standpoint, but you can get them on Amazon. It really is great for getting really flat seams like this. And I'm gonna set my iron down, then I'm gonna chat on my soapbox for a minute. All right, so for a long time, people have told you gotta press your seams under. And that may have been true back when sewing machines were not as good as they are today, and fabric wasn't as good as it is today, and batting isn't as good as it is today. That is no longer the case if you are sewing with a modern sewing machine, modern thread, modern fabric. It's not necessary anymore. So when you press your seams open, you are getting the exact amount on either side like this. When you press it to the side, what it is doing is it is going to take up a tiny bit of fabric, and you are going to have a scant less than you're supposed to be. And in a lot of cases, that doesn't matter a ton, but when you're doing a block like this, where you have so many that are going out and out and out and out, that scant quarter inch seam less on every single round is gonna make a big difference when you get to your outer ones. Not to mention when you're pressing out like that with the machine or your iron and you're pushing it, you're more likely to get bends. So that's going to make your piece more wonky as well. There are a lot of professional quilters, Leah Day is one of them, Krista Watson is another, who always swear by pressing their seams open because you get fantastic results. And everybody always says, but then you can't stitch in the ditch. Well, there is no ditch because there's no ditch that's created, but what you can do is stitch right next to the seam, which is really all you do when you stitch in the ditch anyway, and create the same results. And let me tell you, as a long armer myself, it is a lot easier because there's a lot less bulk, and if you stitch into a really thick seam that has had a lot pressed under it, you are likely to break a needle, you're likely to blow a fuse on your machine, and have uneven stitches that look like trash. So this is the way to do it. I think it's fabulous. The folks who comment on the videos say I switched doing it this way and I love it. You know, give it a try. I think you're gonna love it. And that's that. And if you decide to be a quilt police and comment on the video, we've addressed the issues. I have more than 70 quilts behind me that have all been pressed open and none of them have fallen apart yet. So we are doing just fine. Don't you worry about it. It will give you much better quilting results. All right, off the soapbox, back to the tutorial. So when I'm doing this for an actual quilt, I'll chain piece all of these together, I'll press them open all at the same time, then I lay them all back out. And at this point, your block should be the exact same length from here to here as it is from your piece, your second background piece that we're gonna sew onto this. And when I sew, I like to flip it so that the seam side of the block is up like this. I find that it stretches out less and you don't have to worry about accidentally flipping seams in directions we don't want them to go. So when we line this up, again, I typically don't pin, but you certainly can. It should be the same length. If it's not the same length, then you've got a problem. You got to figure out what it is. Either your stitch was not accurate and your 1/4 inch stitch wasn't right, or maybe you pressed it to the side and you ate up a little bit of fabric, or you've cut something wrong either in your first 2 pieces or in your 3rd piece, but you've got to figure out what it is. Don't just keep sewing on thinking it's going to get better, because it won't. So you'd want to definitely check that out along every step of the way. That doesn't mean you need to check every single piece, but if you want to have a good, nice log cabin at the end, it's very important that everything fits together nicely at every step. All right, so we're gonna sew this guy together now. So what I did, I just took a couple of stitches there. Then what I like to do is just line up my corners at the bottom, and then I just put my finger there, and that helps keep everything together without needing to pin, which saves some time. And then when I get to the point where my finger can't hold that in place anymore, I just move it to the side, and that helps me maintain my nice even 1/4 inch stitch all the way down. If you let go of it and you just let it do its thing, you're unlikely to have that, and then your blocks are gonna get wonky. All right, we're gonna press this open as well. I'm just making sure not to press that seam going in the wrong direction. And again, I like to press from both sides and get that really nice and flat. And everything is looking great right now. We have a nice square block. Again, if it's not square at this point, you're gonna have bigger and bigger problems because it's going to compound as you add more to it. So you wanna make sure that all your edges are meeting up nicely at every step. All right, so we're gonna put it back and we're just gonna keep going round. So we made it around the first row. Everything is still nice and square. Good sign. Again, if it ever starts to get off where your pieces are not matching to the width, you need to figure out what's going on. Most likely, either you didn't sew your 1/4 inch seam correctly, you didn't press it open, or you didn't cut your piece to the correct size to start with. So one of those 3 things is most likely the culprit. Always check and see which it is before continuing on. So once you've made it around the first round, you're going to notice that there are 2 seams on the side that you need to sew to next, because you're always going to have usually 2 that will fit next when you are going around. And in this case, this could go really on any corner, and sometimes it's easy to get yourself confused, but you want it to go on the side that has 2 seams. So there's 2 seams here, only 1 here, and then nothing on this side. So you're always kind of looking for that little U, and that's where you're going to sew to. I'm just going to keep going around. We're going to leave the cameras rolling so you guys can see it in fast forward motion. I am going to stop when we get to some of these longer ones so I can show you how I handle it when I am sewing longer seams together to make sure everything stays nice and square as we're working. All right, so I've reached my final row, and I'm going to show you now how I keep everything together without having to use pins. Everything is still very square. All my edges are lining up the way they're supposed to. Again, if you're having issues, check that these are cut to the correct size. Check that you're sewing your quarter inch seam accurately all the way through, not just in some parts, and also that you're pressing those seams open, because that'll make a big difference in your block turning out the size it's supposed to be when it is all done. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to flip this right sides together, and then I'm going to flip it over so that I can sew with the strip side down. Now, what I like to do, you can certainly pin this if you want, but what I do is I get it started here, and I'll stitch a couple of stitches in. Then I'm going to grab my corners, and I'm just going to put those together, and I'm going to just pull it taut. You can kind of probably see that I'm pulling it straight back, and I kind of just put my hands on the sewing machine throat and let it come up. And by giving it that little bit of tautness, if you did get off just a smidge as you're sewing, it kind of eases it in properly throughout, so that way your ends can still line up nicely. So now when I press this open, we can see that everything is nice and in alignment. It's the size it should be. Everything is looking as it should because we're lined up really nicely on both sides, as we should be. So that's just how I line it up. Again, you could always pin on either side too, and then in the center if that makes you more comfortable, but I try to avoid pinning if I can, and I definitely was able to with this one. All right, so I'm going to keep going round and round, and we'll show you the finished block when it's all done. All right, so this is it. We've got our final block here, and it is super cool. So we've got our log cabin strips, but we've got fatter ones on one half with the fat quarters and skinnier ones on the background. It's going to make it look curved when we put it together. We have done a little swish pattern with ours, which is why I'm calling it undulation. But the beauty of log cabins is you really can arrange them any which way, so you can have a lot of fun making this your own once you get your blocks together. And it is really just a really fun quilt. I love how this kind of just curves out. It looks so cool. Like I said, this has been on my bucket list for a while. I'm excited to finally do it and share it with all of you. Again, the fabric is Modern Meadow. It was featured in this month's bundle for our Stash with Stephanie subscription program. If you join it, these have already shipped out. So if you want to make this specific you would want to get the kit that is available on our website, shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. And then next month, we're going to be getting a new bundle, which you can see on our website. And if you like it, you can give it a go. We have all the bundles that we put out for the last year or so on there. So if you scroll through and you like the way they look and you like receiving modern fabric, then this is a good deal for you. Again, you're going to save on your fat quarters because you're getting them for a $2.99 a fat quarter as opposed to like $3.60 to $4, which is what it's typically going for these days. And then you save 25% on additional fabric you want to order to either make the kit that we have put together to turn your bundle into a full quilt, or if you have something else in mind, you can get additional yardage and have some fun with that. Either way, it's a lot of fun. You get the pattern that we have created that's been inspired by the fabric to show it off really well as for free, and you get access to our previous pattern. So it is really a great deal. We hear all the time that it's one of the best subscription clubs out there in terms of what you get for your dollars, and now you don't need a coupon to get it. You just need to be logged in and subscribed, and you can get everything. So check that out. It's all over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. And next up, we're gonna have a video on how I'm quilting this, because I really want to show off the different sections. So I'm gonna quilt the background very differently than I'm going to quilt the actual fabric fat quarter part of it, so that it really stands out and has some fun. So check that out next. It's going to be coming out in a couple of days. And until next time, happy quilting.